Before we start, take a moment to like and subscribe. The world as it was a tapestry of quiet, predictable cycles. The breath of dawn, the heat of noon, the cool descent of dusk, each a rhythm that governed the lives of the small folk who lived on the land. But the quiet was not meant to last. It was broken by a tremor, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the very bones of the earth. The holy books whispered of a strange and terrible union. The sons of God had seen that the daughters of men were fair. And from that forbidden joining, a new kind of being walked the earth. They were the Nephilim. And their arrival was a fracture in the ancient stillness of the world. They did not arrive with a fanfare of horns or a crack of thunder, but with an unsettling silence that preceded their colossal presence. The air would grow still and heavy, the birds ceasing their songs in the trees, the buzzing of insects vanishing into an unnatural quiet. Then, the ground would begin to tremble, a low, pulsing beat that was felt not just underfoot, but deep within the chests of every living creature. And from beyond the horizon, they would appear. They were beings of impossible scale, their forms varying as widely as the landscape itself. Some had skin like the dark, cracked earth after a long summer, showing the lines and patterns of a world far older than any living memory. Their hair was a tangled mass of roots and vines, and their eyes held a cold, ancient light, like polished stones that had watched the world turn for countless ages. Others possessed an unsettling, terrible beauty, their features sculpted with a divine precision that only served to magnify their monstrous size. They were a living paradox, a blend of heaven and earth that unsettled the very core of reality. Their movements were deliberate and unstoppable. A single stride could cross a field where men would have to walk for hours. When a Nephilim walked, the very ground under their feet trembled, and little ripples would spread out across the surface of still rivers. The small folk of the land reacted with a raw mix of awe and primal terror. Some elders, seeing their silent, immense strength, fell to their knees in a fearful reverence, believing that a divine presence had come to their valley. But others, especially mothers and children, hid behind trees and inside their huts, their hearts pounding with a fear that words could not capture. The Nephilim did not speak the language of men, yet their presence communicated a silent, undeniable power that made the tribes of the land feel smaller than they had ever felt before. They were a new epoch, a living chronicle written in the landscape, a reminder that the world had been changed forever. The Nephilim did not merely exist in the world. They began to remake it. Their size and power were shocking, and their works were a constant display of their might. They did not toil with tools of wood and iron like men. They commanded the very earth itself. A single Nephilim could tear huge, jagged boulders from the sides of mountains with their bare hands, the sound echoing like 100 crashes of thunder. These boulders, which 1,000 men could not have moved, were used to build monuments of incomprehensible scale. They erected colossal stone circles that rose like ancient crowns to the sky, their purpose a mystery to the small people of the land. They also created long, straight roads that went for miles, cutting through thick forests and flattening hills with ease. These structures were bigger than anything the world had ever seen, a new kind of mark on the land that showed everyone just how great the giants were. At first, the small folk looked upon the giants as saviors. These were the mighty men of old, the heroes spoken of in whispers. When a wild beast, a monstrous lion, or a huge bear threatened a village, a Nephilim would simply walk over and push it away with a gentle nudge, not even breaking a sweat. When two tribes fought over land, a Nephilim would stand between them, and their towering presence alone would make the tribes stop fighting and find a tense, unspoken peace. For a while, the world felt a sense of security, because no earthly evil seemed to be a match for the great strength of a giant. But this period of grace was not to last. The awe that people felt turned to fear, and the fear turned to deep anger. The Nephilim were not content with just being mighty. Their great strength was matched by an even greater pride and a huge selfish appetite. They began to demand tribute from the villages, the best of the harvest, the juiciest fruits, the fattest cattle, and the most beautiful things the people made with their hands. They held huge feasts that lasted for days, with more food and drink consumed than 100 families could eat. Their voices, once a low rumble, became a deafening shout of command, filled with greed and a casual cruelty. Their arrogance became a blight upon the land. Their presence seemed to poison the very air, making men greedy, violent, and wicked. Men began to copy the giants, forgetting their own simple, humble natures for a short moment of false power and wealth. The moral goodness of the world began to unravel, thread by thread. As the darkness of the giants' hearts seeped into the hearts of men, the world descended into an age of unending violence. The giants, with their titanic strength, became instruments of war, not peace. Their immense pride, once a source of awe, now fueled an insatiable hunger for dominance over one another. They began fighting each other over land, over gold, and over their own great egos. Their battles were of a scale that scarred the very face of the world. When two giants fought, the ground shook for miles. The tremors so violent that they caused mudslides on distant hillsides. Trees were ripped from the earth and thrown like sticks, entire forests splintering under the weight of their fury. The sounds of their war cries were a constant terror on the wind, a deep, guttural bellow that could be heard for miles and miles, and men would flee into caves to escape the unbearable sound. It was a new kind of evil, a kind that a man's strength could not stand against. The very essence of the world, once so balanced, was thrown into a state of chaotic misery. And so a great story began to spread, not of a giant's battle, but of a man named Noah who lived in a different land. He was building a huge boat on dry ground, a task so absurd that it was met with endless mockery. The Nephilim laughed at the very idea, their booming voices shaking the mountains with jeers. Laughing at the idea of a guy building a massive boat out in the desert. They roared, their laughter a huge grinding noise like rocks being crushed together. They saw the giant ark and filled with loud jeers. They would make the ground tremble with their mocking laughter. But their arrogance was a blindness. For the rain came. It wasn't a gentle shower. It was a huge, angry flood of fury, a torrent that fell from the sky with the force of a hammer. It rained so hard that it felt like the heavens were being ripped apart. The ground began to turn into a thick, wet mud, and the rivers grew so wide that they swallowed everything in their path. The Nephilim, for the first time, were truly afraid. Their roars of command turned to panicked howls as they ran, their powerful strides suddenly clumsy and hurried as they slipped and stumbled in the mud. Their immense weight, once a symbol of their strength, became a useless burden against a force that was infinite. They tried to climb the highest mountains, but the floodwaters rose faster than they could climb. They tried to build new stone monuments to escape the rising tide, but the very stones they heaved turned to sand beneath the force of the flood. Their huge power, which had once been their greatest strength, became a useless burden. They were drowned, their final gasps swallowed by the churning water, and the very memory of their wicked rule was washed away.